Hello and welcome to True Crime Mysteries. This is part 2 of the Cabin 28 series. We are just going to continue on. Please watch part 1 first. The link is in the description box below, and then move on to part 3. At 8 a.m., Sheila Sharp makes the familiar trek over to Cabin 28. She had intended to quickly change into clothing suitable for church and go with the Seabolts. However, when she entered the home, what was found was beyond comprehension. She recognized her brother Johnny lying face up, covered in blood. There was another boy face down. They were tied at the feet. She saw a yellow blanket covering what she thought looked like another body, but she didn't know who. She ran out of the cabin screaming, back to the Seabolts, who called the police. Sheila and James Seabolt Jr. go to Cabin 28 to find the rest of the family. Looking into the windows of the cabin, they see the youngest boys and Jason Eason sleeping. They wake them by tapping on the window and insist that they crawl through the window so they don't see the horrors in the living room. Justin is sent home to his parents, and the boys wait with Sheila for police. James continued to look around for survivors, since Sheila didn't know who was under the blanket, and the hope was to find Tina hiding. James noted that the back door of the cabin was left open. James eventually gave up, assuming there was no one else inside, rejoining the others outside. The crime scene wasn't contained. It was initially handled by the Plumas County Sheriff's Office. It was riddled with errors and oversights from the very beginning. Deputy Hank Clement was first to arrive. He confirmed all 3 bodies were deceased. Sergeant Jerry Shaver was next on the scene and began talking to a group of people outside and taking statements. At some point, Shaver and Clement walked through the house, reviewing the scene. Sheriff Sylvester Doug Thomas and Assistant Sheriff Ken Shanks came next, and then Don Stoy joined them. The scene now had 5 men walk through it. 7 if you consider that James and Sheila had also entered the scene, none of whom knew how to preserve a crime scene. It wasn't until all 5 men had walked through that photographs of the scene were taken. Officers were doing house-by-house welfare checks and interviewing potential witnesses, and it wasn't for several hours that officers noticed Tina was unaccounted for. The FBI were called in to investigate Tina's disappearance, but the FBI was only involved for about 2 weeks before handing the case back to the Plumas County Sheriff's Office. The most perplexing thing about the homicide was the fact that the 3 young boys slept through the whole ordeal, the fact that the killers had just left them as potential witnesses. Ricky and Greg had no recollection, and the first thing they remembered was Sheila waking them. But Justin was reported to have told his mother that he had dreamed he had heard noises in the living room, and when he opened the bedroom door, he saw Sue talking to 2 men, Johnny and Dana, walking in the front door and began arguing with the men. A fight broke out. Tina came into the room and was quickly taken away by one of the men. It is important to note that Justin's testimonies changed at various points in his life, and the most detailed recount he gave was under hypnosis. His testimony also doesn't quite line up with the evidence, but it is strongly believed that he was a witness, and the trauma of the ordeal is why he doesn't have a strong, consistent memory. In the home, investigators found 2 bloody kitchen knives, which had been used with such force that one was severely bent. They also found a hammer and a pellet gun. Each victim had been bound with medical tape and electrical cords taken from various appliances around the home, and an extension cord. Sheila stated that they had never had medical tape before, so it was believed that at least one of the suspects brought it with them. Investigators confirmed it was Sue who was under the yellow blanket. She had just been wearing a robe, but was otherwise naked. Her underwear had been stuffed into her mouth along with a ball of tape. The tape in the underwear was secured to her mouth with an extension cord. Sue had been beaten with a claw hammer and stabbed multiple times. Johnny had been beaten and stabbed, but his throat was slit. Dana Wingate, however, had been strangled and beaten with a different styled instrument believed to be a hammer, but wasn't among the weapons recovered. Evidence collected by investigators were drops of blood on Tina's bed, a bloody footprint in the yard, knife marks on various walls throughout the home, and a bloody fingerprint on the inside of a door frame and a banister. It is strongly believed that at least 2 people would have been needed to control the chaos. The killers were also in no rush. The victims died of their wounds, with the exception of Dana. There were lone pools of blood on the living room floor, indicating the boys had been moved at some point and repositioned. The bottom of Sue's bare feet and one of the boys' shoes were covered in blood, suggesting that at one point they were mobile and had walked through blood. Detectives noted a lack of fingerprints and identifiable DNA left at the scene. This led the detectives to believe that the suspects had worn gloves and were prepared. When the initial investigation took place, forensic evidence, it wasn't commonplace for DNA to be collected, such as hair, skin cells, and other transferred DNA, so it wasn't collected at the scene. All blood at the scene was determined to belong to the victims. The hope at the time was that Tina was hiding in the woods. She was known to create forts and hideouts. However, her remains were found 3 years later, 100 miles from Keddie, near Feather Falls. Along with the remains, they found a child's blanket, a blue nylon jacket, a pair of Levi's jeans with a missing back pocket, and an empty surgical tape dispenser. In the 3 years between the murders and the discovery of Tina's body, the case had gone completely cold. There were rumors that the slayings had been connected to drugs, but law enforcement were never able to find a connection. No one could even definitively know the intended target for the slayings. Theories ranged from all the victims, but none of the victims had any real enemies or altercations. Police followed many theories, putting 4,000 man-hours working the case. Detectives even ruled out the serial killers Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole, who were active in the area at the time of the killings. This is going to be the end of part 2. I'm breaking the story up into separate segments. Part 1 is the introduction background, part 2 is the crime, part 3 is the investigation/conclusion. This is all going to be uploaded at the same time, so there's no waiting. You can find all the links to part 1 and 3 in the description box. Thank you all for understanding. These larger single story deep dives do take me a long time to do research, so I'm trying out this method to try out something new. I will see you very soon for part 3. Bye.